This is the full interview video with LakeFeperd, and to be honest, I didn't expect to upload the full interview, but there's so much that's interesting here. I really think it's worth just listening to and maybe like playing a simple game or something, and just taking it easy and learning some stuff hopefully from this, because it's quite interesting. But with that in mind, I didn't really intend to keep my own audio, so while it is recorded, you'll notice that it's not to the normal standard. In fact, at the start you'll hear some adorable voice breaking. I don't know how that happened, but you know, it's live, you go with what you've got. Anyway, with that in mind, I hope you enjoy. Maybe put some music on. I would recommend the Spark soundtracks. In fact, I'll even add a music playlist if you really want to find some new music to listen to that would fit what we're talking about. With all that in mind, please do enjoy. I have with me LakeFeperd, creator of fan games Sonic Before the Sequel and After the Sequel, and others, as well as his own commercial product, Spark the Electric Jester. Since then, he's been developing Spark 2, which makes the jump to 3D and releases very soon. Thank you for taking the time today to discuss your work.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. So my first question, was Sonic Before the Sequel the first game that you made? If not, was there something that came before, and what was it?
I used to do a lot of Flash animations, inspired by the likes of Super Mario Bros. Z. And it was then that I learned most of my Flash skills and my animation ability. Mostly when it comes to like sprite animation and stuff like that. I didn't really do much like drawn animation until much later. But yeah, that's what I used to do before that. And then in the middle of it, I started doing Before the Sequel, and I just kind of enjoyed it, and I decided to just make it Before the Sequel full time.
That's sort of interesting. So in that case, was that the first game that you made, or did you...
No. It was just videos. Just internet animations. Okay. Uploaded to YouTube.
I see, okay. That's quite interesting. So that was YouTube and not like Newgrounds or anything like that?
Yes.
Alright.
I think I might have purged all of them from the internet at this point because they were quite embarrassing, but regardless.
Yeah, I think we've all done something like that where it's like, I do not want anyone remembering this.
I was literally 14, so
hey.
I was quite young.
Yeah, we all do that at a young age and then think, oh no, why did I do this? So, regarding Sonic fan games in general, it seems like fan projects for that series are a lot more common than like other retro franchises. Do you think there's a reason for that in particular?
You mean Sonic?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's because of a general dissatisfaction with the series. I mean, then again, if you look at Mario, there is plenty of fan games, but I think it's motivated by plenty of things. I mean, first of all, there's always a demand for like like Mario Maker. There's a demand for that in Sonic, and I do find that a lot of the people who start making Sonic fan games, they start making them because they just want to make they want a Sonic Maker. They want to make a little Sonic level. They want to make their own Sonic level, and they just want to do that. Maybe it's for fun, maybe it's for learning, but most of the times I from my experience, have seen that it's for fun. And although back then, I can't exactly pinpoint what was exactly like the main reason why people made fan games. I think it was just a mix of like people who are dissatisfied with the series and want a game like the classics. Although it took a while for people to actually start making games featuring genuinely featuring classic Sonic. Back then, people would make their own versions of modern Sonic and put them in a 2D game. This is way back in the early 2000s or so.
Are we talking like
games.
Sorry, are we talking like a Sonic Advance style game or still like a classic Sonic?
No. They're getting the classic sprites and changing them to look like modern Sonic. So
okay.
Even if you look at something like Sonic Mega Mix, where it's still classic Sonic, Sonic controls and has features from the modern games. And you got the Lightspeed Dash, you got the running animation with all the swirly feet, and all those sorts of things. And then people actually started looking back at the classics and being like, oh, there's something here. And they started doing games more the likes of Sonic Mania. I don't know exactly, there's not exactly a cutoff point. It might have been the release of Sonic 06, who knows? Although there's still people who make Sonic games like they want to make a game like Sonic 06 and they want to do it better. And there's a lot of games like that. So in general, I think it's either for fun or because of a dissatisfaction of the series. And they feel like they themselves can do better than Sega. And a lot of times they have, unfortunately. At least back in the Sonic 06 era. Although at least from Unleashed forward, that's very debatable.
Yeah, I would say that we sort of saw that a second time, especially around the time of, say, before the sequel and after the sequel, where just sort of after they released, we had Sonic Lost World and then Sonic Boom, both of which were not quite to people's expectations. And do you think that on Sega's part, they looked at the performance of those games, looked at the popularity of fan games at the time, and started to realize, oh wow, this is very popular?
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so. I think the reason why something like Sonic Mania happened was precisely due to the efforts of the people who made it. They tried to get that game to happen. They went after Sega for that. I don't think Sega themselves were exactly interested. They looked at fan games like, this is popular. I don't think Sega was mostly looking at fan games at all. At least I have no evidence to say that. As far as I know, anyways, it was definitely the efforts of the people who made Mania that made the Mania game happen.
Okay, yeah. That's an interesting take. Because certainly Sega has a weird sort of relationship with the fan projects because they seem to be completely okay with them, but at the same time, Mania was, from what I understand, they like approached them with a demo, and it was only then that they were sort of convinced in that way. And you had things like the Sonic 3 widescreen, version and all that really never went anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, Christian Whitehead himself did like start by doing simple stuff. I mean, quote unquote simple stuff, like the ports of Sonic 1 and 2 to mobile and Sonic CD. I think he did Sonic 1. I'm not really sure, but he did 2.
I think he
CD.
did Sonic 1 and 2, the mobile ones, yeah.
And through that, now he already had he had something to say, like, oh, I did this, and it was very very well received. So he already had like a bargaining chip, let's say. So him and the people who made Mania had a pretty good track record. I mean, Pagoda West already had a published game in the form of Major Magnet, so they definitely had something to pitch. They weren't just some fan game makers who have made something that kind of looks impressive, but they haven't published anything. They don't have, let's say, industry experience or anything like that. No, those guys did have experience. So they definitely had something to go there and tell Sega about it. Like, okay, yeah, we can make a game. We can make a game and publish it. And Sega was like, seems like a good idea. And then they approved it.
And then it was a good idea.
Turns out it was, yeah.
Yeah.
But in the case of Sonic Boom, it wasn't.
Oh, no. We don't talk about that.
That's a very interesting thing. I mean, when Sega has to approve a project by like an outside studio that wants to make a project with Sonic, well, sometimes it can end in complete disaster. So it's a hard call for them. So yeah.
Right. So talking more specifically about after Sonic Mania released, it feels like maybe it's just the sort of perception of it, but it feels like fan games and fan projects are receiving a lot of attention now because people who didn't follow the scene before are going, wow, this is the kind of stuff that people can make. And do you think this has affected the landscape at all in like the fan game and fan hack scenes? Or do you think it's mostly the same?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, sure, yeah. So following Sonic Mania, it feels like a lot more people who didn't follow the scene before for like fan projects are starting to pay attention now, thinking, wow, the quality here is amazing. Do you think that has changed how the landscape is for those creators because there's maybe some more eyes watching?
Yes, it has in a way. In a very complicated way, but at the same time it hasn't, because this mentality that a lot of people have in the Sonic fan community, I've seen this plenty of times almost everywhere, is that a lot of people who make Sonic fan games, they want to like quote unquote work for Sega, like make an official Sonic game. Personally, I think that's a bad idea. I don't really want to work for Sega personally, but uh, at least that's my view on it. I don't want to work for a big company. But like how can I put it? Um, there's always been this mentality of people being like, I want to make a game and work for Sega, make a Sonic game. I want to work at Sega and make a Sonic game. And that really hasn't changed, like at all. People still have that mentality, maybe more, but I can't really confirm if there's more because it's just been something that always existed. And now, when it comes to the coverage of fan games, people covered them before, although I'm not really sure about the timeline because Mania definitely has like increased the popularity of fan games, I'm sure, but I'm not really sure if it has because fan games might be getting more coverage, but at the same time, nothing's really like hitting the mainstream too much. I guess I would say it's still the same as it was before, at least in my opinion. I haven't been looking at it too much, so I wouldn't really know because I pretty much left the fan gaming scene in terms of making fan games myself.
Yeah, I was gonna ask more about that. So you say that, you didn't really have the thing of wanting to work for Sega, but obviously with things like Spark, you have that desire to make your own projects and sell them on like Steam and platforms like that.
Yeah.
From what point, back when you were doing just the fan games, did you intend to do that at some point? I know that there's things like after the sequel, there's like the Kirby upgrade you get, and that seems almost similar in a way to Spark, though obviously Spark is a much different take on that idea of upgrades and power-ups.
Mm.
So do you think that like was it at that point that you were sort of thinking of doing your own thing, or did it kind of happen as a natural progression? You put this in, you thought, wow, it's kind of fun to play a game that's like in this style, and then you came up with the idea for Spark.
I've always wanted to make my own game. Ever since the beginnings of Sonic before the sequel, I've wanted to make it's as far as I remember anyways, like I always wanted to make my own game. And by the time I was making before the sequel, I pretty much realized, oh yeah, I enjoy making games. So I kind of want to pursue a career in this. So I think it was back in after the sequel itself with the concept of being Sonic that I've realized, maybe I could like make this into an original character. So as far as I remember, that's pretty much how Spark got its inception, by mixing the being part up from Kirby and Sonic, and then trying to modify that into his own original character. And he pretty much got Spark in that case. So yeah, and then from then onwards, I started drawing the character, thinking about the universe, and there was plenty of iterations that went past. And when I was working on Sonic Chrono Adventure, which was my third and final fan game, I was already working on Spark. So I already had like a little beta build of Spark, or like a little test level working while I was working on Chrono Adventure. So yeah, it was already in the works way back then. So that was a long time coming.
So then, when you were making Spark, did you have to change your approach to like game design compared to when you were working on like Sonic fan games? And how do you deal with that issue of like, I want to make a game that's like this, but I want to make my own thing. I don't want to make something that's just exactly the same as Sonic. I want to make my own thing, make my own path in this.
I actually felt like I had to make Spark more like Sonic. I had to like implement more Sonic elements into it, because when I started, immediately I already wanted it to be very different. And I felt like I had to work backwards in that sense. Like I had to introduce loops back into the game because they weren't really there. So like Spark was very much like a slow action, like Mega Man type of game. And then I decided, you know what, this is kind of boring. I want to make it faster. So I sped up the game significantly. The original version of Spark it's terrible. It's slow. It looks like trash. And that game had to have changed itself a lot before it became what is known today. That game was pretty much a game made without any plans. It was just like, oh, this works. Okay, this works. And then I put that in, and this works. And then I put that in, and I find a way to make it work. Oh, this doesn't work. Doesn't go. And that was one of his biggest flaws, really. But somehow I managed to mix that into a package that it's reasonably consistent.
Yeah, I was going to say, I did not expect that actually, considering that Spark 1, as it is released, it feels
Hmm.
like, it's quite, it knows what it wants to be.
Hmm. If you dig through my channel, you might just find like a video of one of the original builds of Spark, which is still, I think, using music from after the sequel. And it's like a different game. Like Spark walks differently. He walks really, really slow. He does like just one little jump. I mean, he always did a little jump, but like his attack on the air is just like the kick. And like when you start attacking, you can't even jump out of it. You can't cancel it. There's no dash. The wall jump is like not very. It's not very good. It still wasn't like changed or optimized to be what it is. It was bad. There was only we could only take 3 hits. You couldn't charge up your energy. You could start charge shots, but it was just really, really boring. You just go from left to right. The stage had no flow to it. You would never go down like a slope and go really fast. There was barely any of it. It was just like a blocky Mega Man type of level design that didn't really
Right.
work with what I was going for. I just okay. I'm just consider this one. But this one's from 2015. This is before the Kickstarter, as far as I remember. I think it was a year before the Kickstarter. But just in this trailer, there's already plenty of like unused stages that were completely removed in the final version. That just don't exist.
Interesting. Okay, I'll definitely have to have a look at that and maybe
Hmm.
put some stuff in as an example into the video. Though I will make it clear that that it's old footage. I'm not gonna go,
It
hey guys, this is
is
the final game here.
so
That'd be evil.
old. It is really old.
But it's really cool that you've like kept stuff up that really demonstrates like how even just during the development of that one game, your work progressed and improved
Hmm.
and all that.
Yeah.
Well, regarding Spark One, while we're talking about that, that
Hmm.
was your first like commercial game that you sold, right?
Hmm.
So not only that, but you also opened a Kickstarter,
Yes.
kind of part way through the project, or when you first sort of, uh, wanted people to start paying attention to it.
Hmm.
Uh, would you say that in doing that, making that your first commercial product, were there any sort of challenges that you maybe did or didn't expect that came up as a result of that compared to just making games that you released for free?
I mean, back then at least, getting games released was a bit harder. Now it's stuff like Steam Direct. It's far easier, as far as I can tell. You just need to pay a fee. It's not an unreasonably expensive fee, but it's still like something. It's like four
Is it
hundred
a
bucks for
hundred
me.
dollars? Oh, okay.
Maybe for me it's 400. Uh, That's in my currency.
Yeah.
But aside from that, you gotta go through all the Steam process. It's not exactly the easiest thing, but at least the Kickstarter itself was, at least to me, the hardest part because setting up a Kickstarter is very hard. There's plenty of things that I really don't want to go on about, but then there's also the anxiety of the game getting funded or not. It's hard to get your game funded. It's not easy, but I did
Yeah.
manage it, thankfully. If that Kickstarter failed, I don't know where I would be today. I would probably have canceled Spark. It wouldn't have happened, and it would have worked on just a different game.
So then, when you were working on Spark, was that like once it was funded, was that a full time project, or were you balancing other
Yeah,
stuff with it?
well, kinda. I've always like back then I was still in college, so I couldn't really. I had to do it at the same time as whatever college projects I was working at the time. So
Wow.
yeah, it was impossible for me to make it full time, but it was as full time as I could make it out to be. So I worked on it as much as I possibly could during that time. Now that it's over, now that college has been over, it's been over for a couple of years now. Uh, I can pretty much work on those full time, and I couldn't have asked for anything better. Thank God.
That's great to hear, actually. Especially because I feel like Spark One really like did deserve the success, considering it is. There's not a ton of games that really nail that, like without like just being, oh, it's a Sonic game. It's like it's a platformer, but it has those elements of speed and other inspirations. Where, because I feel like a lot of the time, people forget that a lot of platformers take like the sort of Mario inspiration in design,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't
Yeah.
see a lot from that other side, from the sort of Sega side of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, am I correct in saying that Spark One was made with, is it Click Team Fusion?
Yes. It was called back then Multimedia Fusion 2. And then I do believe this transition happened in between Spark's development, and then it became ClickTeam Fusion 2.5.
I see. So then that's the same engine that you used back when you were doing like before the sequel, after the sequel,
Yes,
and
it
Chrono
is.
Adventure. Uh,
Sparks built on top of whatever code I built for all those games.
okay. So then did that present any sort of interesting challenges
Many.
considering the choice of engine?
Many. I mean,
Yes.
ClickTeam Fusion itself is a very simple game making engine, and because it's so simple, it strips down a couple of things that make it much easier when you go into more complicated stuff like Unity. Although Unity isn't as complicated as people think it is, but um, basically, there's many things that it does that are not good. It's like let's say you want to port it to PC. Well, no, you want to port it to a console. Well, you can't. You need to work. You need to hire someone like a third party in order to do it for you, and it's not exactly the cheapest thing in the world. That's why Spark couldn't really see console ports, and probably won't ever. Maybe I'm not really sure,
Is that
but
the work of porting it to another engine, or is it like something
no,
that
no, no.
adapts the current engine?
Yeah, it kind of as far as I can tell, it just kind of publishes the same code that was already made. I'm not really sure, to be honest. But regardless, um, like when you put that game on PC, because it works on ClickTeam Fusion, because it works on ClickTeam Fusion code, it's far harder to optimize the game, and it won't run as well as if it was made in another engine. Just because of how ClickTeam Fusion works, it's not exactly the most optimized and um, engine that is light on the processor. No, it likes to use the processor. It likes to use all of it. So that's just how it is.
I see. Um, so you said that you used multimedia and later Click Team Fusion for Spark One, and then you're using Unity for Spark Two. Were there
Mm-hmm.
other tools that you used for the first game that you then had to change or pick up something new in order to make Spark Two in 3D through Unity?
Since the beginning, since my beginning of my game design career, I've always been practicing with Blender 3D modeling software and Unity. So I've always had like, I mean, not I picked up Unity a bit later, but I've always been like messing with things that are like above what I used to do. Like I always knew Blender so much so that some of the enemies in Spark One are pre-rendered 3D models, and people haven't noticed them thankfully, but it's because like I hand painted the shading on them so it wouldn't look as bad. But stuff like the common boss fight, that's a 3D model that I hand painted over. Uh,
So it's like, is it the first Lethal League? I think used a similar system of using 3D models, and then it was
mm,
all work done on top to make it look 2D.
I'm not really sure. I mean, I haven't played the first Legal League, but at least in my case, I've done it to mask the fact that they're 3D as much as it possibly could. So yeah, but I've always been dabbling in those sorts of softwares. So really, like even before I released Spark, there was a period in college where I sort of lost faith in the idea of Spark. This is before the Kickstarter, and I decided, you know what, I'm gonna make a game on Unity. So I made XF, which is a little weird racing game where you don't really race anyone but the clock, and you have to just beat a stage, like linear stage, and go through like several different parts of a stage. Like there's this one where you start in the countryside and then suddenly you go through a tunnel. Now you're in the sea, and then you're in the desert, and then you're in a city. And you just kind of have to go through the stage, and the more sections you complete on a single run without running out the clock, the more medals you got. That was the game, and it wasn't very polished, but it was made on Unity, and this is before I really had that much coding prowess on me. I really didn't know Unity C# code for quite a while until I actually got the hang of it way later. But thankfully, I did manage to get it down. And then when I started working on Spark 2, I made this engine called Hedge Physics, which I published it, and I've always had this idea that I wanted to make a 3D Sonic engine because I didn't feel like there was a 3D Sonic engine made public at the time, and I've been dabbling with it for a very very long time, since the beginnings of college. Well, since I started using Unity in college, which I think was like halfway through, and Hedge Physics was its final product. It was already like something I've been working on for quite a long time, but then I released that. And what really motivated me to actually work on Spark 2 was that I got a 3D Sonic game engine ready, and I was like, I could use this for my original game. So I decided, you know what? I think I'm going to make this an original game. So I went and did it, and that's how Spark 2 started.
So was that around the time that you released Hedge Physics? Because that was that during Spark 1's development? Was that when you started working on Spark 2, or was it later on after the release of Spark 1?
I don't really remember if it was after or before, but I do think I was dabbling on the idea of Hedge Physics, or I was already like doing prototypes of Hedge Physics before, before Spark was, maybe even before Spark's Kickstarter. I'm not really sure, but I was already like trying to make a 3D Sonic engine at that point. Now, the current iteration of Hedge Physics probably started around that point as well.
Okay, so the point where you looked at the engine you sort of made and thought, oh, I can make my own thing from this. Was that
it was
that much long after you released it, or?
Yeah, it was after I released Hedge Physics itself.
So then, like, is that sort of just sorry, I'll try that sentence again. For a sort of time frame, was that like still during Spark 1's development, or was that after you finished it and thought, oh, I could do this next?
No, this was after Spark 1 was finished, and then I finished Hedge Physics as far as I remember. And then later I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to make a game. This way I modeled Fark. I did some attacks, and I was like, okay, I can make a game out of this. And then I made a game out of it. And it's done now.
I know. Well done, by the way.
Thank you.
Is that a solo project then, or are you working with other people now on like Spark 2?
I mean, I'm working with people for the music and the art on the title screen, not the title screen, the menu screen, and the stuff that's been posted on Twitter. That's by Andy, which is also one of my musicians. But mostly, aside from some coding help here and there from some people that I ask help with, just like, oh, I don't know how to do this thing. Do you know how to do it? And they send me like a couple lines of code, like a function. Mostly alone. All the models are made by me, pretty much all textures and 3D models, stages. All programming is pretty much by me, except for the help that I received. So yeah.
That's really impressive. Just the how quickly you sort of went from conception stage to finishing the game, and it's a complete game, just mostly on your own.
I mean, it's been 2.5 years, but
3D platformer. Like, wow.
It took a long time. I don't know.
2.5 years is like, for a 3D platformer, something to understand for a team of like several people. But for one person to take that on is impressive.
I think if a game like that is very well managed and has a reasonable budget, they can finish it in a year. So, yeah. I don't know. I feel like when I see indie projects that take like 6 years to make, I'm like, nah, I don't think this should have taken 6 years.
Oh no, for the most part, I can't think of a game that benefits from, oh yeah, let's do another 3 years of this.
Yeah, no, it feels like this game could have been done in 2, especially when people have like a big team. It's just that in a lot of cases, of a lot of indie projects, the indie project is not the main project. It's like a secondary thing. Like you have an artist that's like working on it, like sometimes in the weekends when he can. So that's why it probably takes 6 years. But if you're working on something legitimately real time, I do think you can finish it in like a year or 2. When I see indie projects,
I'm thinking of sorry.
when I see indie projects that take a very long time, I don't want to assume that the people who are making them are lazy, although there is a chance that it is. But um, it's just like it's probably like a side thing. This is the assumption that I go about. Like, oh, it's not his main thing. Like that's the thing people know him from, but he probably has like a job or something like that. He really just can't work on this thing full time like I do. So, yeah.
Right. Talking more about Spark 2's development, uh, now that it is releasing on Steam and on, I don't know, is it on any other PC platforms? Or is it
It just
just
seems for
Steam?
now.
Alright. You were talking about the console versions for Spark 1 and how you don't think that's likely, but with Spark 2 and Unity, do you think it's a possibility? The one thing that I'm especially interested about is your Twitter bio says that you're based in Brazil, and
Yes.
if I remember right, they have quite high import costs on consoles. I was wondering if that plays a part in the likelihood of making those versions.
I don't think so. No. I mean, uh, now the import on consoles, I'm not really sure if that's a thing anymore. I've been now that I have my own money and I'm buying my own video games. At least back then I had to ask parents for that, but I've been now that I've been actually looking at prices and stuff like that. Buying physical games is actually far cheaper than buying them online, which is very interesting. Uh, but I don't know if the importing tax is actually a real thing anymore. I'm not really sure. Like when I look at the price of a game, it's like, oh yeah, that's the straight up the conversion from dollar to our currency. That makes sense. It's still expensive, very expensive, because our
Hmm.
currency has been inflating for quite a long time now. And it's still at a quite low value. It wasn't like this in like 5 or 6 years ago. In fact, it was like I don't know 2 times higher the value than it is right now. But
Ooh.
I don't know if the tax is that big. I actually don't know what it is, but regardless, and a lot of companies actually do release their products in here, like Sony and Microsoft. So I'm not sure if it is like an important tax problem anymore, but it's still quite expensive. But I don't think you would have a problem now.
That's good to hear. I had a look into it, but there isn't a whole lot of people talking about it now because a couple of years ago everyone was talking about, oh, this is how much a PS4 or like a Wii U costs in Brazil because of the import costs. But I
Hmm.
couldn't find a whole lot of people talking about what it's like now. So that's interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, then again, I haven't been keeping up with it. I've just been looking at the prices myself and being like, oh, this is it's still expensive, but like at least to me, I can afford it. But it's like it's still pretty much like way too expensive for most people. So yeah.
Okay. Uh, I would say between like both your fan games and your like commercial stuff you're releasing now, the soundtrack's always something that really, really stands out. They're always very impressive because you have multiple composers with different styles who all take their approach to the soundtrack. But what I was wondering is how does this affect the development time at all? Having to,
Mm,
manage multiple composers and multiple tracks and
mm,
all that stuff.
yeah, it does affect development time. Yeah, and you're gonna see a bit of that in Spark 2's release. It's close to the end of the game. Not gonna see anything on it, but it's just a little unfortunate thing. But it's gonna be fine. You're gonna be doing some stuff later, anyways. But it does, yeah. Especially back on the days of Sonic after the sequel, the game was delayed for several months until the music was done. And what's unfortunate is that our musicians are very busy themselves. Working on Spark Two isn't like their main gig, so it's like it's something they do on the side, and because of that, it just takes quite a long time for them to finish a song, and that's fine. This is how it works. But yeah, at least back then, the games ended up being delayed for quite a long time because of the music. So yeah.
So I imagine now that you're several projects in and you're still, you've still got these huge soundtracks with multiple composers, you've decided that is the extra development time is worth doing.
What do you mean?
So like you know, if you were having to wait for the sake of other composers and you felt it wasn't really worth it, you may pass on having so many composers or so much like original music the next time. But it seems like you've kept that throughout. So would you consider that like a cost worth paying?
I mean, it. Mm, I mean, with original Spark, everything was finished. As far as I remember, everything was finished before the game's release, so it wasn't really a problem. Uh, right now, I can't really say that we are exactly the best situation when it comes to the music. I don't think everything's done yet, but everything is already set to go. Everything's everything's pretty much finished. So it's a little complicated thing. Like at least right now, I have a whole library of music from the previous game you can use. But how can I put it? It shouldn't really be like a case that we have to delay the game because of the music. It's really management on my part. I have to be the one that commissions those songs as soon as I possibly can. It's just that in this game, I really couldn't do that. But fortunately, now I can actually publish the game with the current scenario that we are right now. So yeah, I mean, like when you said before the extra development time, well, it's not development time; it's waiting time. And back in after the sequel, I was already working on something else while the soundtrack was being made. So it's not really about what development time. It's like the game's done, it's finished. Whatever development time I add more to it, it would just be it's just polish. It's just fixing things here and there. But there's only so many times I can play my own game before my head explodes. You know, like more often than not, when I get close to the end of development, I'm like, holy hell, I played this game like 100 times from beginning to end, over and over and over again, and I am done. I want to release this already.
I never want to see it again.
Yeah, I mean, when you have testers, they can do that for you, but all the times there's some things that only you can really test out and figure it out for yourself, because you can't really know if everything is working when you have unpaid testers, because a lot of times they're not going to finish the whole game, and that's understandable. I mean, I'm not paying them to finish it, so I have to do the work myself, and it is hard.
See, I think that's something that not everybody considers, which is making a game isn't just making the game. There's a lot about playing it yourself and having to test everything that you've just made, and then changing things and updating it, and that must take up a huge amount of time.
You have to step on every single platform, and then sometimes you're gonna find, oh, I forgot to add collision to this one, and you fall through it. So that's a thing you have to always consider. You have to step on everything. You have to test every enemy. You have to go everywhere in the stage, and you have to also do all of the objectives that you have to do in the stage in every possible order. Sometimes you have to play through the entire stage and then go back all the way through and then come back again to notice if anything breaks when you do that, because someone's going to do that, and you don't want the game to break when they're doing that.
And it will be somebody who like puts the video up that everybody sees.
Yeah.
That one very, very specific problem that you would have never thought of.
Yeah, pretty much.
So with what is there regarding the soundtrack, at least what we've seen from the demo so far, I have to say it's sounding very good. And I was wondering if you're planning on releasing Spark 2's like the original tracks you have for sale or on like streaming services or something.
When it comes to releasing the soundtrack, that's on the composers. That's on themselves. As far as I can tell, it's them that released the album for the original Spark. So I'm gonna leave that up to them. They want to like release it on what is it, like Bandcamp or whatever they want. That's on them. And they also, like, all the money from the soundtrack goes directly to them. So when you buy them, it's not coming to me. It's their songs, it's their tracks. So it goes directly to them.
I see. Okay. That was more a question for myself because I do have music from Spark 1 on like my Spotify playlist, just in my shuffle, and every so often it comes up, I think. I'm looking forward to Spark 2.
That's fine. That's good.
Talking more about the music, actually, in the demo for the boss fight, I noticed that it has lyrics that sort of kick in the second half of the song, which
Mm-hmm.
actually reminded me of how bosses work in Metal Gear Rising. So I was
Yes.
wondering, like beyond like things like Sonic and Kirby, if there were other games which influenced the development of that
Too
game.
many. Too many. If people think that I'm only inspired by Sonic or Kirby, it's a lie. It's been a case in my other games that I've used music from things like Ace Combat. Stunt Race Effects is like a Super Nintendo game that I really really like. Like the other games like Yoshi's Island, that's a very good game that I draw a lot of inspiration from. And a lot of PS2 titles in general, like the original God of War series. Uh, I get a lot of inspiration from Platinum games in general, mostly Bayonetta and Wonderful 101, and especially Metal Gear Rising. Like I really love their games. Like many, especially F-Zero itself, is a major inspiration for me in many ways. So much so that I've done and tried to make games like F-Zero in the past, and I already have made games like them.
Is this
Uh,
that racing game that you were talking about that you made in Unity way back?
partially, partially. That was inspired actually mostly by Stunt Race Effects.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yes, and it had some F-Zero elements in it, and then I reworked it later into mostly an F-Zero like game. Uh,
Is that game available anywhere? Have you
yes, it
put it up
is.
anywhere? Oh,
Yeah,
it is.
yeah. Everything that I've made for XF has always been available.
Uh,
To like an unreasonable degree, to the point that I made the build of the source code for the original XF available for anyone to get and play with it if they are able to.
what do you say it was called? XF?
XF, yeah, XF Racing Institute. So XF is a little racing game that I made. I started with a version that had a very super effects chip sort of style to it slash pixel art, and it was very much inspired by Sunrise Effects with some elements from Zero. And then I moved on to a game where it was full pixel art now, and it used a car, but it was more like F Zero. And then I moved on to a full like F Zero like car game, and I made around 3 stages for that one. The most complete version is the first one, and the second most is the final one. But that game's art style, XF's art style, was pretty much the what set in motion Spark 2's art style. I prototyped that one and I made that one, and then yeah, I used that for most of Spark 2. Pretty much learned how to make Unity games by making XF and whatever college project I was working on at the time.
So your college course was related to game development, was it?
It was, but it wasn't the college project itself that taught me how to use Unity. It taught me a couple of things, but it wasn't really the college itself that actually taught me. I kind of just had to struggle through it myself and figure it out. I mean, the first XF, the first one was made uh, like I what happened exactly? I think I was introduced to Unity, had like the first lesson where they just pretty much taught me the UI, and then like a week later, I just fucking bring a demo of XF and I throw it in the class, and me and my friends are playing it and are having a lot of fun. So, like even then, I just got introduced to the UI, and here I am already making a game. So yeah,
That's really cool. So this is sort of like you can sort of see the steps then where you worked from your first steps in Unity all the way up to releasing a game in Unity.
yeah, pretty much. It took me quite a lot. It took quite a lot of time to work on it and get it right. It's a process that might take years for a lot of people, and that's fine. But it's just how it is. You have to work really, really hard on it and just figure it out.
Cool. So in Spark 2, the one of the interesting things is how you've opted for a combat system that you sort of balance with the platforming gameplay. What I was wondering is like how you address that balance of not having too much of one side and not enough of the other.
It's very complicated. I think you people have to play the game to see it, but it's very easy in combat, and this is a problem with the original Sparked game as well. That the enemies were just kind of there; you could run past them, at least most of them. And this is even worse in Spark 2, and it's just a very unfortunate aspect of it. But at the very least, with bosses and things like that, you do have to engage on combat. Plus, I gave a lot of advantages for actually engaging on combat. If you engage in combat, you need to defeat enemies. You either get points, you get health back, or you get like certain buffs that improve your attack or improve your speed and whatnot. And you get energy, which you can use to deal even more damage and whatnot. And plus, there's a score run now, which you can use to get you try your best to get as many points as possible through that score run, and you have to beat the stage in less than 5 minutes and get the best amount of score possible. So with that, there is a reason for combat now, as in you have to try to go get the score runs. It's very much like in the original Sonic Adventure games, where you have to get as much score as possible and beat the stage as fast as possible. That means you have to engage with enemies.
That's quite an interesting take on the system. I quite like your approach there, which is you've not some of the fighting you do have to do, some of the you don't. But it means that players who just want to run through stuff can just do that. But the people who want to get involved in the combat and maximize their potential playing the game can do that, because the combat, for the most part, is not forced, but it gives you advantages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the idea.
That's really...
It really isn't forced. Unless you're in a boss fight. In the boss fight, you have to engage in combat.
Yeah, but at that point, that's sort of where these upgrades you get from other fights would prove useful, right? Like you get one for increased damage or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, they don't really carry over to boss fights, but they stay on the stage itself. For the score run specifically, they are a bigger advantage.
Okay. Talking more about in one of the trailers, you had footage of cutscene, and there was some swearing in the dialogue, and it seems like some people weren't too fond of that. And what I was wondering is, I think you removed it, and I was
it's all removed.
Why?
It's all removed.
So what was your thought process? Why did you have a change of heart?
Just because people pressured me onto it, really. I really didn't want to remove it. It was only one character that swore. It was only that character, EJ, and he's specifically not exactly a good guy, and an annoying guy, and that he's specifically meant to be disliked. So
he's an edgy boy.
He's an edgy boy. Yes, he is exactly that. And he's not really... He's annoying as hell, and Fark, the main character, treats him with utmost disrespect throughout the entire game. So it was part of his character in this dialogue, but through pressure from people and realizing that it might have given the game a mature rating just for having swears in it, which is fucking ridiculous. Like, think about it. Just because you have swears on it, you can't really say the F word 1 or 3 times. If you say it more than that, then your game is suddenly a mature game. And I'm like, okay. Sure, because it's like the adults that are swearing, right?
Sorry?
It's the adults that are swearing, not the children.
Yeah. But like, also, like with each country, it's not entirely consistent what will get you high rating and what won't. Because over like,
it's all different.
In the Americas and in Europe, violence isn't as bad as in like Japan. But on the other hand, things with like partial nudity or fan service get a much higher rating here than they do over in Asia.
Yeah, it's really complicated.
So talking more about that story, actually, it seems like, and with the most recent demo for Spark 2, there was like little bits of cutscenes here and there. It seems like there's more going into the world building and characters. I was wondering if you had any specific goals with the story of Spark 2 compared to when you were making the first game.
I mean, I have this game that I have in mind that has been planned for a very, very long time, although I'm really not sure if it will actually ever happen. But I had it planned for a very, very long time, and Spark 2 is kinda a filler to that game. It really isn't. In a way, it does have like some really important plot points that couldn't really be dismissed, but it's pretty much a kind of a gap between this game I have planned and the original Spark. And I think it also introduces a different take on the plot itself in a way, because previously it was focused on Spark himself, and Spark isn't exactly like a serious character, right? He has like a really silly goal, and he's going through this silly world and this silly adventure. But in this time with Fark, I wanted to have like a character who has a more serious goal that wants to achieve him like something more important than just getting his job back, at least.
Yeah, watching some of the cutscenes, I got like the sort of Sonic Adventure 2 feel, which is exactly what I like from a game, which is it's serious, but it's not like it's got a bit of that sort of action movie cheese to it, which makes it really enjoyable instead of like super grim, dark, and serious.
I wanted to make it as cheesy. I wanted to make it as cheesy as I could. It was my goal with it.
That's amazing to hear. That makes me so happy. I love, like, I feel like the Sonic series has never matched Sonic Adventure 2 in terms of trying to take itself seriously, but also being kind of like silly at the same time.
Yeah.
That makes me very happy.
That's good.
So I have to ask the obligatory question, because I did see this a lot in the comments, which is, oh, why is it called Spark 2 if it features Fark and you don't play as Spark?
I mean, it's part of the Spark series. I mean, Spark shows up in the first cutscene, like a little flashback, I guess. But I don't know. I mean, it's a sequel, direct sequel to the game. It's on the Spark series, so it might as well be called Spark 2.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. I just thought, like, there was a weird, like, so many people were asking that. It's like, surely this is obvious. It's a sequel. It doesn't need to have the same character.
No, I don't think it does. I don't know. It's the Spark series, and the Spark series features whatever happens in Spark's world. Yeah. And that's it.
All right, great. So, in general, do you have any advice for somebody who would be looking to either make their own fan games or who are working up to making their own first commercial product?
Any advice? I mean, I would say work as hard as you possibly can. Like, you really got nothing to lose by working hard. You will only stand to learn more and more about whatever you want to make. Just keep working on it. Keep getting better at what you're doing, and it's going to take several years. I mean, it took 7 for me. It's no joke. It took a very long time for me. But eventually, I think you'll be able to manage it and have something good that you can show to other people. But you just have to keep working on it. Don't give up. Work on it as hard as you can, and try to make something that people are interested in. So yeah.
Awesome. So thank you for your answers and for your time today.
That's fine.
So when does Spark 2 release, and is there anything that you want to let people know about the game who may be interested in picking it up?
It releases on 16th of May, and play with a controller. That's it. You can play with a keyboard, but I don't recommend it.
That's good advice.